Have you ever correctly had a gut feeling to dislike someone who, on the surface, was a cool person that everybody else liked? What's the story? Story 1. My girlfriend lived in a rented house with her best friend Diane. Diane met a guy at a bar one night named Brad. Brad was handsome, as in leading man handsome. The best looking built guy Diane had ever hooked up with. They got serious pretty quickly, and in the process of hanging out at my girlfriend's house, I started running into Brad from time to time. He was always nice enough, but something about him just seemed off to me. Nothing could put my finger on it, but I always got a bad vibe from him. My girlfriend didn't understand my trepidation towards Brad, and Diane certainly didn't, but wanted nothing to do with him. Whirlwind romance became engagement and elopement, and he moved in with Diane as a married couple, and my girlfriend moved in with me. Fast forward a few months, they're both working, happy, talking about trying for a baby. Everything seems to be going great. With her sterling credit, Diane buys Brad a new motorcycle, since he drives an older truck and his credit is subpar. Diane leaves work sick one day and comes home early. She finds the motorcycle parked in the driveway, which is strange since he's supposed to be at work. As she gets out of her car, the mailman is walking up the driveway and he hands her the mail. She starts to look through the stack and finds a bunch of credit card statements. At the same moment, Brad appears and yanks the wad of bills out of her hand in a "don't you worry about that" fashion. Argument ensues, both about the mysterious credit card statements and the reason why he's at home and not at work. Things don't add up, and due to some ongoing inconsistencies, Diane hires a private investigator to check up on her husband. A very disturbing report comes back. Brad doesn't have a job. He leaves before she does each morning and waits for her to leave and comes back home. Once there, he entertains both female and male clients as, for lack of better description, a male prostitute. Remember, he was extremely good looking and in good shape. He also opened a multitude of credit cards using Diane's credit and maxed them out with cash advances. When he was confronted with all of this, he hopped onto the motorcycle that he'd cleverly put in her name, and he promptly disappeared. Further investigation into Brad revealed that he employed multiple identities and was at the time, unbeknownst to any of them, married to 3 different women in different states. A conman of the highest order, who I was able to sniff out, I suppose due to the fact that I wasn't blinded by his dimples, pecs, and square jaw as Diane and my girlfriend were. Diane wound up having to declare bankruptcy over the mess, going from carefully cultivated perfect credit to a complete financial disaster. As far as I know, Brad was never made to answer for anything he'd done to her, although assume that by now he's locked up somewhere dead or reformed. Not to defend the guy, but he clearly did have a job, just not the one she thought. Now that is taking a second life to a whole other level. I really hope Diane bounced back from all that and found a much better man. You know, not a liar. I also really hope Brad is paying for what he did to Diane and those other women too. I can't imagine how many more lives he freaked up that haven't come into the light yet. Must have felt really good though, knowing that you didn't fall for his lies. Story 2. Actually, yes, we are friends with a couple who have 2 young daughters. At the time this all occurred, the daughters were about 9 and 12. Our friends live in one of those suburbia heck communities where every house is on 1/5 of an acre, all cul-de-sacs, etc. The neighbors on this particular cul-de-sac had all become very close-knit. So when we would hang out with our friends at their place, we would meet all the neighbors too, mostly young families with school-aged children. Everyone was super nice and always had a good time. But there was this one guy, we'll call him Peter. Peter lived across the street. He was single, he drove a flashy car. He was what I would describe as overly friendly. Peter made my husband uncomfortable from word go. He was an EMT or some such and was constantly trying to give parents medical and very personal advice about their kids, especially their young daughters. Whenever we hung out with the friend group, Peter would break away and go play with the kids. Tag, hide and seek. Remember one time one of the little girls was on an elliptical machine, and Peter got up on the machine behind her and started working it with her to show her how. All the parents would say, "Oh, that Peter, he's such a big help, he's so good with kids." My husband felt very strongly that Peter was a creeper to the nth degree. He bothered us so much, in fact, that we stopped hanging out with the entire group after a while. Recently, we reconnected with our friends, and guess what? Peter had become increasingly obsessed with one of their daughters, texting her, leaving her notes in the mailbox. When they told him to back off and he'd moved his attention to one of the other little girls on the street, they eventually filed a complaint against him with the police. Thinking the police couldn't press specific charges, and Peter packed up and moved across the state. And then somehow through the grapevine, my friend found out that in the short time Peter's been living in this new town. There have already been several complaints to the police for similar conduct. It's bothered me ever since because we didn't speak up at the time. We get we were misconstruing the situation. Surely these parents knew better than us, and it wasn't our place to weigh in. I'm still not sure what the best course of action should have been, but I'm interested in opinions. As a parent, I would have appreciated a general, "Look, I don't have a specific reason, but this guy makes me uncomfortable, especially the way he acts around the kids." That way I know to at least pay closer attention for a while until I decide if I feel the same, or if I need to take some type of action or whatever. Honestly, I agree. That's the best way to go about it. You should always follow your gut, and this story proves it. It's kind of like the saying, if you see something, say something. Because worst case scenario, he's just a guy that's good with kids, and you were just someone that got a weird vibe from not knowing him and spoke up to make sure. Story 3. I worked as a supervisor at a water park. There were something like 7 other supervisors and 3 managers. Let's give them names: Matt, Jess, and Casey, overseeing 200 lifeguards. One year we had a lifeguard we'll call Kevin. Everybody loved Kevin. Oh, Kevin was the coolest, and all the girls loved Kevin, or Kevin's such a great lifeguard. The thing was though, he was a terrible lifeguard. He was always sloppy, shirt untucked, way too revealed in his chair, and constantly had to yell at him to focus. One day while I was trying to explain why he needed to do better, I realized he wasn't really listening to me, and then said, "Whatever you say, babe." That just struck me as odd, and then I started to notice how disrespectful he was to all of the female guards and supervisors, but everyone just wrote it off as playful. Brought it up at the next management team meeting, but everyone disagreed with me about it. That was when I found out one of our managers was fast-tracking Kevin for a supervisor position, and they already started training him. About a week later, Kevin decided to test his power at the top of a ride by telling the lifeguards he was in charge and to speed up the release times of guests so the lines would move faster. This made the ride super dangerous because people were crashing into each other on the ride. A bunch of people got hurt. After a certain number of people got hurt from tubes colliding, the general manager ran up to the top of the ride to shut everything down. They called in maintenance to shut off the water to that one side of the park, thinking something was going wrong if people were going that fast down the ride. The general manager, with 3 managers in tail, hoofed it and get there to find what Kevin had done. Our GM, a woman, starts yelling at Kevin and says to our manager Matt in front of everybody, "What does this fat cow think she's talking to?" Jess starts to tell Kevin that that's our GM who is everyone's boss, and Kevin cuts her off and says, "Honey, why don't you let the men speak?" Our GM lost it at that point, called security and had him escorted off the property. She told Matt he should be fired for giving any sort of responsibility to someone willing to put other people's lives at risk. But Matt was always a good employee, so instead, since he was the one that wanted to hire Kevin, he now had to fire him and lose any rights he had to choosing any future higher level employees. Found out all this at the closing meeting that night, and they asked me how did I see through Kevin when everyone else loved him. Honestly, didn't know how other people couldn't see it. Some people are just so oblivious, and it drives me insane how they can't see through some people's BS. I hope you got a raise or something from that though. But God, I would have paid good money to see that little brat get kicked out. How old was this guy though? How does he think it's okay to talk to anyone like that, never mind your boss and coworkers? Story 4. When I was 8, my parents invited a family over who had 2 sons. My mom loved both sons and worked with their mom. The whole family came over for dinner. The 2 boys were monsters. I showed them the playroom in the basement and they both proceeded to smack me around and break my toys. My mom didn't believe me when I told her and told me to go downstairs and keep the boys busy. About 20 minutes later, I went back upstairs. My dad asked me why I was up there. I explained both boys said I was boring and went outside and didn't know where they were. Both sets of parents spent 2 hours looking for them. Finally found them several blocks away. My mom blamed me because I was supposed to keep these 2 older boys entertained in the basement. My dad refused to let them come over again after hearing from me what happened. These guys were insanely popular with both other kids and parents. No one thought they could do anything wrong. Later, both guys were arrested for dealing with me. The younger one was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend, then he died a few weeks later from an OD. The older one is currently on parole and lives in his mom's basement. What I like about that is the neat symmetry. Story 5. I ran a restaurant with a friend a few years back. My friend worked the back and I took the front, though at the time he hired Alex. I was helping prep during the day. As Alex was being trained everywhere in BOH, I spent a couple weeks with him going over prep, and so I had plenty of time to get a sense of his character. The guy was a liar. Little things, like having a pill press so he could make his own Vicodin. Stupidest lie in the world, especially to a one-time pillhead like me. Constantly he would spout small details about his life that made me think this guy was a serious frick. But my friend loved him. Then he had the way of calming the raging beast of the chef during a hectic shift, so it seemed harmless. Until one busy night, Alex collapsed outside. We called an ambulance and slugged it out without him. The next day, he shows up explaining he has stomach cancer and checked himself out of the hospital. He is met with sympathy from everyone except for me, who greeted the news with a hidden eye roll. But you just don't call someone out if there is even a slight chance they have cancer. The next month, Alex is out of work all the time due to treatments, and I'm filling in. One week he was gone for 4 days, and when he returned, he explained how the radiation wasn't working. And he only had a few years. My faith was shaken. But finally, I shared my thoughts with a chef, my friend. What followed was the greatest argument 2 friends have ever had and nearly left the restaurant altogether. Finally, my friend decided to have a benefit for Alex as the guy clearly needed money for all of this treatment. It's expensive to die in America. So he contacts the wife, who responds to the text with, "Call me ASAP." Turns out she had no idea what he was talking about. Apparently Alex took everything, including the night he passed out. The benefit was canceled, the wife kicked him out, and we never saw Alex again. Until his face turned up on a Crime Stoppers a year later. Seems like he took to robbing gas stations. The frick is still in prison to this day. Always love a happy ending where a butthole like that is still in prison. Imagine being that much of a lowlife that you lie about something as serious as cancer. That's just disrespectful to every cancer patient. Hope you guys got some better help. Story 6. I used to work in TV production, and I had to write the transcript for an interview for a TV host interview program, for this instance with Rod Harris. By the end of the transcript, after watching him speak, sometimes rewinding over and over parts to get the transcript right, it was clear something was off. The whole interview was a performance. The way he gestured and spoke about himself and his illustrious career, and his benevolence and humble beginnings. It was acting. Having watched the interview so closely, could see he was not being natural at all. After the program went to air the next day, there was a general buzz at the station. It went well. Rolf Harris was considered a national treasure. Everyone loved Rolf Harris. One of the producers at another program at the station was chatting to me about how brilliant the interview was. I was just honest and said what I wrote above, that he didn't seem right, his movements and words were too measured and not sincere, that he seemed to be performing rather than just talking. The producer said to me, well, he is a performer, but I never liked him after that. He gave me the creeps. A few years later, he was charged for a string of spicy assaults on children, using his celebrity to get away for pretty much his whole life, some dating back to the 60s. He's an old man now. So, that's my story. My mom was watching one of those 100 Best Children Entertainers of All Time shows 5 years ago and commented that Rolf Harris was creepy. She tutted and said he was well respected, etc. Refuses to remember the incident now, of course. Story 7. Previous job. The CEO wanted to bump the newest member of the team to the manager. Always had a strange feeling about the guy and made my thoughts very clear to my boss. We were on good terms, in fact helped bring the company up when it was about to go under, and just felt that this guy was trouble for the company's future. No one else felt the way I did about him, but the feeling was so strong that I told my boss that if they promoted him to manager, I'm leaving. I would not stand to see the company fail after working my butt off to save it from the dumps multiple times. In any case, they promoted him to manager, and as prompted, quit. They tried to ask me back, but was firm. As long as he's manager, I cannot work there. Fast forward 18 months, I got a text from one of my former colleagues. They should get up to work and the place was locked. Turns out company got shut down for tax evasion and fraud. Don't know the details and don't really care for them, but that was one of the biggest I told you so moments I've ever had. From what I've read, this pattern is common when dealing with corporate psychopaths. Some people have a bad feeling about them that they can't quite place, but the upper management is charmed by them so they get promoted. And then fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, etc. Yeah, that seems to be how it goes over and over again and why I cannot stand big corporations. They always choose the absolute worst people to run it and then get surprised when it goes downhill. The worst part is those people that made the terrible decisions get bailed out, and the only ones getting hurt are the little guys they screwed over. Story 8. Yep, at work there was this one kid who was just freaking weird. Everyone gave him a pass because he was just a socially awkward gamer kid who couldn't talk to girls. Like I'm awkward as frick and I don't give off Hagid vibes. There was just something so off about him. Once I was putting lotion on my hands after washing them and he said something to the effect of, "Oh, I really love black skin. It's always so smooth." Like who says that stuff? I had a Buffalo Bill flashing in my head. Another time when I was pregnant, he came up behind me and started rubbing my stomach and asked if I was going to eat the placenta. So gross for so many reasons. Anyway, time passes that my friend hits me up telling me that he's been arrested for the rape and murder of a girl in a building he worked maintenance at. So yeah, suckers, it wasn't just me being a jerk, he was psycho. As a somewhat socially awkward gamer dude, who the heck even thinks to just start rubbing a pregnant lady's stomach and then proceed to ask them if they're gonna eat the placenta? Like how is he not fired on the spot and how are you the only one creeped out by him? Story 9. My ex-wife's dad always gave me the creeps. Turns out he was a pedo and had touched the heck out of my ex-wife when she was a kid. Something she didn't reveal until year 6 of our marriage, after we had allowed him to babysit our daughter on occasion. Last heard of him, he was probably going to jail for assaulting a 7-year-old girl a few years back, but don't ask about his current status. I'm sorry that happened. My dad did the same thing. Didn't tell my mom that his mom and dad had touched him and his sisters for years until they had babysat my brother, and a lot. Actually, my dad never told her, my aunt did. I think they're both dead now, but I don't stay in touch with his family, so I don't know. I know that kind of stuff is really hard to tell someone about, but that's just wrong that she kept it from you for so long when it involved your own child. I'm glad he's locked up, and I hope your daughter is well. Story 10. Oh man, when I was in 7th grade, my former best friend started hanging out with this cool guy who had just moved to the area. We'll call him Nick. Nick was a tough guy. I don't care about the attitude that she really gravitated to, and I couldn't shake his attitude for some reason. And I remember telling her that I didn't trust Nick. She stopped hanging out with me in favor of him. Nick grew up to be a poophead, got in trouble all the time throughout school, and was eventually expelled from our high school for fighting. She still kept hanging out with him. 3 years later, Nick broke into her and her boyfriend's home with 2 others and shot them both in the head, over her failing to repay around $300 she'd asked him for 6 months prior. She lived, her boyfriend did not. Nick is currently doing life in prison. I don't know if life in prison is enough. He seems like a terrible person that has been terrible his whole life, especially since you got those vibes from the start. And a lot of the time, people like that just don't change. I feel so bad for her and her boyfriend's family. I hope she got some better friends after that and is recovering and doing better. Story 11. In undergrad, I was out with one of my closest girlfriends who introduced me to this guy she said was really cool. He had this arrogant attitude, like he was so great for some reason not obvious to me. He was kind of acting like God's gift to women. I didn't think much of it until a few months later when he was charged with multiple spicy assaults in one night. He went around his apartment building and found his way into 2 or 3 women's apartments and assaulted them. He was found within a day and arrested. When his trial came around, he insisted on representing himself. even though his previous lawyer and the judge told him this was a bad idea. It went horribly for him. He asked for his ex-girlfriend to testify, and the last question he asked her was, "Would you say I'm well endowed?" WTF, why would you ask that? He was convicted, and I think he's serving 25 to 50 years. Man, sounds like he knew there was no way out of it and just wanted to go down with everyone thinking he had a good-sized member. But I'm sorry, did you say multiple assaults? In one night? Oh my god. Story 12. There's this one woman who is like the standing grandmother for a large number of people in my community. She lives on social media, so she is there for everybody. Everybody knows her, she knows everybody. Everybody loves her, everybody tells her things. She's old enough to be a young grandmother or old auntie to me, so due to her age, she is seen as harmless. She stabs people in the back. She will gossip like there is no tomorrow. And you bet you've told her something, then everybody you know that she knows will also consequently know about it. If she gets in a position where she needs to take sides, then she will side with the biggest amount of people. If she doesn't like you, then subsequently everyone else she knows won't like you. But, you know, they will all pretend to like you. It turns into a high school type situation sometimes. I don't much like her. She's nice enough to me, but I've seen what she does. I'm just glad to see through it all. Social media can really bring out the monsters. That's pretty much my own mom to a T. She's a Facebook front of a person. This almost reminded me of a much tamer version of a movie. I believe it was called Ma or something like that. Was really hoping the sweet older lady would stay a sweet older lady, but then I remembered what this video is all about. Story 13. One of the most prominent members of the local BDSM community. I met him at Rocky Horror on my 15th birthday. He was in his mid-20s back then. My sister already knew she didn't like him and ran up when he approached me and said, "Stay the frick away from my sister." I asked, "What the frick? He was just saying hi." She grabbed me and said, "You never hang out with that guy, you hear me? Never." A few years later, I found out why. He's apparently an R-wordist who pressures girls not to press charges against him, or also have them exiled from the community and out them to all the vanilla people they know as a kinky who is asking for it. He still hosts a lot of the events. I've just stopped going to any event to avoid him. He also messages me on Fetal and Collar Space asking for play sessions at least a couple times a year. So glad your sister was there to watch over you and protect you. Definitely have to be safe and mindful, especially in places like that. Some real weirdos out there. Story 14. Sometime during 11th grade, luckily a long time ago, there was this new girl who had spent a year in Britain. This is Germany. I was quite interested because I grew up in Britain until we moved to Germany when I was 6 years old. Anyway, I had a bad feeling about her the whole time. Something about her was exceptionally phony. I went on 2 dates with her before she told me about it, and I immediately stopped meeting her. Turns out she hadn't been to Britain. That's the story they told us at school so she would fit in. She really spent a year behind bars for trying to strangle her 3-year-old sister. Since then, I really watch out for my gut feeling. Never proved to be wrong. Story 15. New guy at work named Matt. Everyone loved him. Claimed to be an Iraq war veteran, super energetic and positive. Found out I pre-ordered an Xbox One and was having some people from work over to try it out. He got my address from another coworker and showed up. Since everyone liked him, I didn't kick him out. When my wife came home from work, he started freaking out and threatening to go get his gun from his car because she was black. Everyone yells for him to leave and we push him out of the house. The wife was already on the phone with the police. They finally show up and find 2 pistols, a rifle, and a freezer Ziploc full of assorted prescription pills not prescribed to him. Turns out he's also only 20 years old and lied about being in the army on top of numerous other issues. Freaking wow. Story 16. When I was little, I didn't like my grandma's new boyfriend. Everyone thought he was great, but I made a face and avoided him. After months of them getting together, my grandma was at her condo and he came over unannounced. Stone Cold Claire said nothing, walked over towards her slowly. She keeps calling his name, but he's not answering. She gets a horribly bad feeling and asks, "Are you going to kill me?" No answer. He started coming at her faster and there was no way to get around her couch. So she jumped it like a hurdle and went away to safety. Called the cops and he was gone. She moved very shortly after and I never heard from him again. Little kids are very good judges of character, like dogs. That's why if a kid tells me someone is creeping them out, I will always listen to them. So glad your grandma had the moves and was able to get away. Story 17. Yep, there was this guy who had moved from CA and started working at the former bar we were at. Gave me a bad feeling from the beginning. Fellow bartenders hung out with him, gave him hugs, etc. He was nice, but he always had this Eeyore attitude. Like, oh, poor me with puppy dog eyes and stuff. Hugged him once and it felt wrong and I couldn't figure out why. Turns out he is a repeat woman beater. I read 3 separate arrest records of him stalking, choking, harassing 2 different women. Then we found out he was actually hurting his coworker while everyone else knew and no one did anything. I haven't seen him since we found out, and I'm not sure what I would do if I did. If I were you, I'd know, but I'd probably end up in the cell next to him. Story 18. My dad, ever since I was little, knew there was something freaked up about him. Honestly think he's a sociopath. As I got older, I felt comfortable expressing that to people like my grandmother and aunt. They definitely didn't agree. They loved him and didn't think that he was that bad. My stance was, just wait. He's gonna go off the rails someday. He's gonna hit someone. He's going to go to jail. He was going to be homeless. When he finally started spiraling, most of the family tried to help him. Several years and more than $100,000 down the drain later, he's hit his own children, been to prison, and is homeless. He's a trash dude. My family definitely trusts me when they say they don't like someone now though. Story 19. Soon to be my ex-brother-in-law. He was always cool, had nice watches, a couple of bikes, cars, etc. Just a little too friendly and felt to me like it was forced. It turns out he's a narcissist who is walking out on his third marriage as the baby is getting more attention than him. I'm concerned my sister-in-law's new boyfriend might be like this. My in-laws love him, but I'm still skeptical. Sister-in-law and new boyfriend just moved in together, so time will tell. I'm just worried about her kids. He's upset that a baby was getting more attention? This one has to be a joke, right? Right? Like, come on, there's no way. Story 20. There was this guy at a party at a bar who seemed to know everyone, but he was just off to me. It was my friend's birthday party and his present was this weird collage of himself that was borderline creepy. They said it was just the way he was. Quirky, weird, whatever. He got wasted and eventually told this story where he met a girl at a party who was absolutely blitzed on Xanax. His exact words that made my ears perk up were, "So I went to bed with her and she didn't remember a thing. Best spicy time of my life." Thought, well, that's our word, so I called him out on it. Good for you calling him out on it. Sadly, I bet he didn't listen to a single word you said. Just seems like the kind of guy who won't care what anyone says. Story 21. There was this guy at my college who was a year behind me, but we had the same major. So we had several classes together and knew a lot of the same people. He was really well liked, but always found him to be kind of creepy. I couldn't really point to anything specific. I was just really uncomfortable around him. That spring, he bludgeoned a girl to death on our campus and said it was because he wanted to see if he could get away with it. So I'd say my gut was right on that one. Story 22. Had a very good friend who had a crush on a roommate. We all hung out, smoked copious amounts of weed, and got along fine. Problem was, he gave me the chills. We all joked that the friend was like a star who just radiated heat. He, on the other hand, took the heat out of the room. They ended up with multiple children, moved a few states away, moved back, got married, and just never was okay with him. He murdered her over a year ago. May he rot in prison. Oh my god. Story 23. One of the pastors at my old church just irked me. He was super upbeat and everyone loved him. When I was 12, he invited me over to play video games and sleep over. My dad thought it was odd and said we were busy that weekend. About a year later, 2 boys from our church accused the pastor of assault on the same night I was supposed to sleep over. The guy changed his name and has been on the run since. The moment you said pastor, I just knew what this was going to be about. Story 24. Had a bad feeling about this guy that used to hang out in my friend group years ago. He just seemed off to me for some reason and was way too old to be hanging out with us. But people liked to keep him around because he was fun and could buy alcohol. Then he kidnapped one of the girls from our friend group and assaulted her behind a grocery store. She was only 13 at the time and he was 25. It really messed her up and she hadn't been the same since. He got out of jail recently too. Poor girl. That guy should be locked up for life. Story 25. My mom always hated my 5th grade teacher. Everyone really liked him, especially my BFF's parents. When we were in college, the police discovered that he was really into CP and cannibalism. Fantasy, never confirmed IRL. Everyone was shocked, small school, but my mom just nodded and said, "I told you something was off about him." Wow, cannibalism. That's a refreshingly new one. Story 26. In my early teens, my aunt was best friends with this pudgy ponytailed man from her workplace. He seemed nice enough, he spoke softly, and he always made decent food. But I was constantly telling my family something was wrong with him, to the point of getting in trouble for it. Well, he's in jail now. He assaulted my male autistic cousin for over a year. Story 27. Very popular person in high school. Leader of the student council all year. We went to school together. Youth pastor. Hated him and found him creepy. Today in prison for murder and attempted murder. And most likely also murdered his first wife. Have an upvote for the youth pastor guilty of something other than SA. Story 28. Guy, super popular at the hospital. Worked in all the cool units, like the trauma, ICU, ED, and rapid response. Always got a weird vibe. Turns out he was stealing fentanyl and dealing it on the side. Not as cool as the people who work in chirotherapy. Story 29. My old drama teacher. Everyone loved him but knew something wasn't right. Sure enough, he was fired for inappropriate behavior with a student. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe for more videos to come or else this spider will be in your bed tonight.